Roland Emmerich is sitting in a rented office in Los Angeles. It's 1992. He's reading a paperback by Erich von Däniken, and he's found the idea that's going to make him famous. The idea is simple. What if the pyramids weren't tombs? What if they were machines? Now, Emmerich wasn't a scientist. He wasn't an archaeologist. He was a German filmmaker who needed a concept that would sell. He called his producing partner, Dean Devlin, describing the machine. Dean, it's a buried ring in sand, large enough to walk through. Devlin said 4 words. We have to make that. 2 years later, Stargate opened in 2,800 theatres across North America. It made $71 million in 3 weeks. Audiences loved it. And somewhere in a classified building in Arlington, Virginia, a group of people watched that happen and said absolutely nothing. Because while Roland Emmerich was inventing a fictional doorway in the Egyptian sand, the people in that Arlington building were doing something far more serious. They were writing the actual math. Team, I need to pause the investigation for a moment. As many of you are now aware, the automated systems here have officially demonetized the channel. While this does slow us down to fortnightly releases, it does not stop us completely. At the moment, YouTube is still showing ads on the videos. They just aren't sharing the revenue. Because of this, the survival of the channel now rests entirely and organically on Intel sharing. Take the link to any episode or the channel itself and drop them into the relevant Reddit communities to grow the network to a point where we can secure private advertisers. Word of mouth is our only remaining broadcast tool. Now let's get back to it. His name is Dr. Eric W. Davis. If you've never heard of him, that's not by accident. Davis holds a doctorate in astrophysics from the University of Arizona. He spent years working with the National Institution for Discovery Science, a private aerospace research group funded by real estate billionaire named Robert Bigelow. He has published peer-reviewed works on subjects that most academic institutions will not touch. Faster-than-light travel, quantum vacuum propulsion, the theoretical engineering of space-time itself. He is not a podcast guest making bold claims for clicks. Eric Davis is the kind of physicist that other physicists treat with careful, institutional caution, because his math keeps working. And when your math keeps working on topics that no one is supposed to take seriously, it makes people deeply uncomfortable. In 2008, Davis sat down and wrote a 34-page technical document. The Department of Defense paid him to produce it. It was not for the public. It was not for academics. It was a classified briefing written in the dry functional language of a defense contractor delivering a threat assessment. The title was Traversable Wormholes, Stargates, and Negative Energy. It wasn't a screenplay, not a thought experiment. It was a physical briefing, commissioned by the Defense Intelligence Agency, filed alongside 37 other technical documents as part of a $22 million black-budget program called ORSOP, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. The Pentagon had spent $22 million asking its best cleared scientist whether the thing in Roland Emmerich's movie was physically possible. And Eric Davis told them it was. To understand what Davis actually proved, we need to go back to 1915, to a man sitting in Berlin, in the middle of a world war, writing equations in the margins of a physics notebook. Albert Einstein was 36 years old when he published the general theory of relativity, his equations comprising of 10 interlocking relationships describing how mass and energy warp the fabric of space and time. These equations still remain the most accurate descriptions of the large-scale universe ever produced. GPS satellites account for them. Black hole imaging relies on them. They are, in every practical sense, the operating system of reality. What Einstein didn't fully appreciate at the time was what those equations quietly permitted. In 1935, Einstein sat down with a younger physicist named Nathan Rosen and examined a curious byproduct buried inside the math. Under specific conditions, the field equations didn't just describe normal space-time. They described a bridge, a connection between 2 separate points in the fabric of the universe, folded through a region the math called a throat. Einstein and Rosen called it a bridge. Everyone else called it a wormhole. The problem was stability. An Einstein-Rosen bridge collapses almost immediately. The gravitational forces inside the throat would rip anything apart, trying to pass through. For decades, the consensus was settled. Wormholes are mathematical curiosities. They're real on paper, but they're fatal in practice. Then, in 1988, a physicist named Kip Thorne, who would later go on to win the Nobel Prize, was phoned up by Carl Sagan. He wanted near instantaneous travel across interstellar distances, and he wanted the science to hold up. Thorne did the math, and what he found is still one of the most quietly significant results in modern theoretical physics. Thorne and his colleague Michael Morris showed that the transversable wormhole was stable enough for a human to walk through. No fatal tide forces, no crushing gravity was possible. This wasn't a trick, it wasn't a stretch, it was a genuine solution. Sagan put it in a novel, the novel became a film, and the physics result was quietly filed in the academic literature, where it sat for 2 decades until Robert Bigelow's company won a classified contract with the government. It is at this point he asks Davis to write the briefing that would bring it into the operational world. What Davis established in those 34 pages was this: the math for a flat entry transversable threshold, stable enough to move personnel and equipment through without harm, instantaneously across arbitrary distances, is not just possible, it is actually permitted by the laws of physics. It is at this point we hit a wall. So here's the problem stated plainly. If you punch a hole through the fabric of space-time, the universe tries to close it. The gravitational pressure around the wormhole throat is simply enormous. Without a counterforce actively pushing back on that pressure, the throat collapses in less than a millisecond. To hold it open, you need a scaffold, something that works against the gravity instead of surrendering to it. In physics, this is called exotic matter, specifically matter with negative energy density. That sounds like something from a bad movie. It isn't. We can already produce and measure negative energy in a laboratory, and it's called the Casimir effect. The problem is scale. To prop open a wormhole large enough for a person to step through, the model suggests that we would need exotic matter equivalent to the mass of Jupiter. Davis documented this problem honestly in the DIA briefing. The United States government had the mathematics, they had the blueprint, and they had no means of generating the fuel source. But buried in the final pages of the document, Davis wrote something that changes the entire shape of the investigation. He noted that while terrestrial engineering was centuries away from synthesizing exotic matter at scale, naturally occurring anomalies in space-time may already be generating the required conditions. The universe, he suggested, might already be doing this. We just need to know where to look. And as it turned out, we didn't have far to go. Jack Scudder had been studying plasma physics at the University of Iowa for 30 years. He was working on the Themis project, and when the data came back, it would change the shape of his career. Themis was 5 NASA probes positioned in a formation around Earth. They'd been deployed to study how our magnetic field interacted with the solar winds. The standard model taught in physics was simple. Earth's magnetosphere and the solar wind pushed against each other. A boundary layer, 2 separate systems. But what Themis found was completely different. Scudder was part of the team analysing the data, and what he saw was a dynamic, rhythmic interaction no one had properly modelled before. Roughly every 8 minutes, the incoming magnetic field of the solar wind and Earth's own field would align in specific geometry. When this did happen, the 2 fields didn't just push against each other, they merged. The process itself is called magnetic reconnection. These are invisible lines of magnetic forces snapping apart and instantly reconnecting across the boundary. These 2 fields fused into a single continuous structure, a massive spiraling cylinder of magnetic force, stretching all the way from Earth's upper atmosphere, all the way to the surface of the Sun, 93 million miles away. The Pentagon had the math for a transversable wormhole, but NASA had just found one, firing directly over our heads as you watch this episode. Now move the investigation forward 8 years. It's November 2004, 50 miles off the coast of San Diego. The USS Princeton is a guided missile cruiser assigned to escort the USS Nimitz carrier strike group. She carries a Spy-1 radar system. It's amongst the most advanced array ever deployed at sea. And for several days leading up to November 14th, the Princeton's radar operators had been tracking something that they couldn't explain. Commander David Fravor was a decorated Navy pilot with 18 years' experience. When he was scrambled from the Nimitz that morning, his orders were straightforward. Go have a look at whatever the Princeton is seeing. Fravor flew an FA-18 Super Hornet. He knew his aircraft, he knew the instruments. He'd spent his whole career calibrating what was real against what wasn't. What he saw descending towards the ocean's surface was an object roughly the shape of a tic-tac. White, oblong, no windows, no visible propulsion, hovering just above a patch of churning water. The tic-tac dropped from 80,000 feet to just above the ocean in approximately 1 second. Not a minute. 1 second. No sonic boom, no thermal plume, no aerodynamic explanation. Fravor brought his aircraft lower, attempting to intercept. The object pivoted, accelerated, and was gone. When ORSAB physicists connected to the DIA program later reviewed the Nimitz data, including the Spy-1 radar returns, infrared footage from the Hornet's targeting system, they didn't classify what they'd recorded as conventional flight. The framework they reached for was called metric engineering. The physics are precise. Under a metric engineering model, the object wasn't pushing through the atmosphere. It wasn't generating any lift or thrust in any conventional sense. It was generating a localized bubble of warp space-time immediately in front of the flight path. A micro wormhole, a mobile transversable threshold, opening up ahead of the craft, with the craft falling through it and the wormhole closing behind continuously in real time. The drop from 80,000 feet to wave level in 1 second isn't flight. It's local warping of the distance between 2 points. The craft doesn't move through space. The space itself moves. Fravor was debriefed. The footage was classified and the Princeton returned to sea. At the same time, a fabricated video began circling online claiming to show Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappearing into a glowing portal surrounded by rotating orbs. Now, digital forensic analysis traced this portal effect frame to frame to a commercial 1990s visual effect called pyromania. The thermal cloud backgrounds were archival, aerial stock footage. It was a hoax. The internet spent years analysing that fake and ignored the classified radar logs of the USS Princeton, only 50 miles off San Diego. Now bring the investigation down to the dirt. High on the Bolivian Altiplano at 12,500 feet above sea level stands a structure known as the Gate of the Sun. It's carved from a single block of andesite, dense volcanic stone, weighing roughly 10 tons. The relief carving is extraordinary, detailed astronomical imagery executed with a precision that requires deep knowledge of celestial mechanics to produce. Survey work by astroastronomers have established that the Gate of the Sun is not a religious artwork. Its aperture tracks the winter solstice, the summer solstice, both equinoxes, and the complex, orbital rhythms of Venus against the Andean horizon. A few hundred miles north, carved into a sheer face of red volcanic rock in southern Peru, is a site called Aramu Muru. A doorway 23 feet square, precision-cut edges, a recessed T-shaped alcove, all structurally engineered. Lintel framework, proportional geometry, leading into a solid mountain. It goes nowhere. Archaeologists have proposed ceremonial explanations for decades. A ritual portal, a symbolic threshold for spiritual passage. But there is a different framework, and it cuts much deeper. In 1945, American military forces withdrew from a small chain of remote South Pacific islands. These were occupied during the Second World War. The indigenous communities on these islands were Melanesian people of Vanuatu, Fiji, and Tanna. They had spent years watching impossible machines arrive from the sky. Enormous metal aircraft descending with food, medicine, and technology beyond imagination for them. And then, without explanation, the machines stopped coming. The islanders built replicas. They carved wooden headsets. They sat in bamboo-controlled towers. They lit signal fires along the cleared dirt runways. They marched in formation carrying wooden rifles, hoping the magic would return. Anthropologists called this a cargo cult. It is the documented universal human response to witnessing a technology you cannot comprehend. You replicate the shape of it. You reproduce its geometry. You do everything in your power to recreate the conditions under which it appeared, because you have no idea what actually made it work. Now apply that framework to the Altiplano. If the advanced intelligence was using naturally occurring flux transfer events, the visual signatures would be extraordinary, energetic, localized, precisely aligned with celestial mechanics. The people who witnessed it would not understand magnetic reconnection dynamics. They wouldn't know Kepthorne's mathematics, but they would see the shape, a threshold, a door, something aligned with the sky, opening at specific moments at specific coordinates. And when it stopped, they did what the Pacific Islanders did in 1945. They carved a door in the stone. They built it at the exact coordinates where they'd seen it open. They engineered it with every astronomical precision they possessed, because the phenomenon they were documenting wasn't tied to celestial geometry. It is likely that Aramu Muru is a straw aeroplane. The gate of the sun is a bamboo-controlled tower. They are not machines. They are a record. They are stone remnants of an ancient cargo cult, built by people who watched something open in the sky above them, and then spent the rest of their civilization trying to call it back. Let's put the full picture on the table. Roland Emmerich made a film in 1994 about a buried ring in Egypt that opened a doorway to another world. By every reasonable measure, it was science fiction. But what the film accomplished, whether by design or by accident, was something far more useful than entertainment. It permanently attached the concept of transversable transit portals to movie theaters and CGI event horizons. It trained an entire global audience to hear the word Stargate and immediately reach for the same mental shelf. They keep their lightsabers and warp drives on. In the intelligence community, this has a name. It's called semantic camouflage. You don't need to hide the real thing if the public have already been conditioned to laugh at the fictional one. The ORSAP program was running during those same years. Eric Davis was doing the math. Jack Scudder's Themis probes were building the atmospheric evidence. The USS Princeton was logging radar returns that no conventional aerospace framework could explain. And the ancient Andean builders had already left their stone record at precisely the coordinates where the sky had done something with remembering. The skeptical view is reasonable. It's worth stating clearly. Flux transfer events are real, but they transport charged particles, not people. The Nimitz encounter remains unclassified but unexplained. The Andean structures are sophisticated astronomical instruments. Davis's document is a theoretical exercise, not an engineering manual. Now, none of this proves that anyone, human, ancient or otherwise, has ever stepped through a threshold. All of that is true. But here's what the position cannot account for. Why did the Defense Intelligence Agency spend $22 million asking whether they could build one? Governments do not commission 34-page briefings on movie props. They do not pay cleared astrophysicists to model exotic matter requirements for a flat entry transversable wormhole because the concept is entertaining. They pay because somewhere in the classified data they are already holding, something has made the question feel urgent. Davis was not being asked to prove that Stargate was theoretically possible. He was being asked to determine how close someone else might already be to building one. Think carefully about what that implies. If you are the person tasked with answering that question, you want to know everything: the astrophysics, the naturally occurring portals, the military encounters, the ancient site sitting at specific geomagnetic coordinates, built by people who apparently witnessed something worth replicating in stone across 1,000 years. You would want to know if the door was already open, and you would want to know if something was already using it. The documents are real, the physics are peer-reviewed, the radar data is classified but confirmed. The structures in the Andes have been standing for 1,500 years, and the only thing that makes all of this seem impossible is a film from 1994, and that might be exactly the point. Thanks for joining me here today, and remember, they rely on you forgetting, on you clicking away. Don't do it, go deeper down the rabbit hole with this next video, and to make sure the signal can find you again, join the network, click subscribe here, and keep the light alive. This is Thinkavarium.